The letter showed up on a Tuesday morning, folded crisp inside one of those thin white envelopes that somehow always feel more threatening than they should. No return address on the front, just the HOA seal stamped in the corner like it meant business. I remember standing there in my driveway with my coffee still warm in my hand, the sun barely up over the pine trees, thinking it was probably another neighborhood newsletter about lawn heights or trash bins. I was wrong. The letter said I owed $250. Apparently, my house was now in violation of community standards. And the violation? A generator. Now that might sound like a small thing, but that little generator would eventually tear our entire HOA apart. My name is Daniel Mercer. I spent 18 years in the Army before I hung up the uniform for good. Nothing glamorous about it. Logistics mostly. Moving equipment, coordinating supply routes, keeping things running when everything around you decided to fall apart. Funny thing about that kind of work, you develop a habit of planning ahead. And that habit is the only reason my daughter is still alive. My daughter Lily is 12. Smart kid, sarcastic in the exact same way her mom used to be. Loves drawing animals and refuses to eat anything green unless you hide it under cheese. Pretty normal kid, except for one thing. She depends on a medical breathing device every night while she sleeps. Without electricity, that machine stops. And when that machine stops, well, let's just say I don't sleep much during blackouts. The first time it happened, we barely made it through the night. Storm rolled through the county, power lines down everywhere, whole neighborhood dark for about 8 hours. I spent the entire night sitting next to Lily's bed watching the battery meter on that machine drop one little bar at a time. When the power finally came back, I made a decision. I wasn't doing that again. So I bought a small backup generator. Quiet model. Clean energy. Legal installation with permits from the county and the fire department. I even had the thing tucked behind the fence line so you couldn't see it from the street. It wasn't big, it wasn't loud, and it only ran during outages. For 6 months, nobody even noticed. Then one afternoon, I came home from the grocery store and saw a woman standing in my yard with a clipboard. She was measuring something. Not casually either, like she was surveying land. I stepped out of the truck and said, "Can I help you?" She didn't jump, didn't look embarrassed, nothing. Just turned toward me slowly like she had every right in the world to be there. Tall woman, mid-50s maybe, sharp haircut, sunglasses that made her look permanently unimpressed. "Daniel Mercer?" she asked. "That's me." She checked something on the clipboard. "I'm Elaine Whitmore, president of the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association." Now, Oak Ridge Estates was one of those suburban developments that looked nice in photos, tidy lawns, identical mailboxes, little wooden signs about community pride. When Lily and I moved here after my divorce, I thought it would be good for her. Safe, quiet, predictable. Elaine looked past me toward the side of the house. "I believe you recently installed a generator." Not a question. I nodded. "Sure did." She took a slow breath like someone preparing to explain something to a stubborn child. "Well, Mr. Mercer, that installation violates Section 14 of the HOA Aesthetic Code." I blinked. "The what code?" She flipped a page and read like a lawyer. "External mechanical equipment visible or audible from neighboring lots must be pre-approved by the association board." "It's behind a fence," I said. "You can't even see it." She tilted her head. "I can hear it." "You heard it during a power outage." "Yes. That's kind of the point." Her lips tightened just a little. The board was not consulted. I laughed once under my breath. Not because it was funny, but because the alternative was asking whether she was serious. "Ma'am, I have a medically dependent child inside this house. The generator is there so her equipment keeps running if the power goes out." For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then she shrugged. "That doesn't change the guidelines." And just like that, I knew exactly what kind of fight this was going to be. If you've ever served in the military, you learn something important about authority. Some people carry it because they earned it. Other people carry it because they finally found a place where no one can say no to them. Elaine Whitmore definitely belonged in the second category. I tried the reasonable approach first. Showed her the permits. Showed her the noise rating on the generator. Even offered to plant extra bushes around it if visibility was the issue. She looked at every document, nodded politely, and then handed me that envelope. $250. Failure to remove the violation within 14 days will result in increased penalties. "You're fining me for keeping my kid alive?" I said. Her voice stayed calm and polished. "I'm enforcing community standards." Then she turned and walked down the driveway like she'd just completed a routine errand. For the next week, I debated what to do. Part of me wanted to just pay the fine and move on. Being a single dad means picking your battles carefully. Energy is limited, patience even more so. But every night, when I watched Lily fall asleep with that breathing machine humming beside her, I kept thinking about what Elaine said. Remove the violation. That meant removing the generator. That meant gambling with my daughter's life because someone with a clipboard didn't like the look of it. So instead of paying the fine, I filed an appeal. Turns out HOAs have procedures for that sort of thing. Forms, hearings, committees. Basically a tiny neighborhood courtroom where people argue about mailbox colors and fence heights. The hearing was scheduled 2 weeks later. I showed up with a folder full of paperwork and a photo of Lily's medical device. Elaine showed up with the HOA rulebook. Guess which one mattered more to the board? The fine increased to $750. And that was the moment I realized something. This wasn't about a generator anymore. This was about control. And if Elaine Whitmore thought I was just going to roll over, well, she clearly had never met a retired Army logistics officer with time, patience, and a very long memory. But what none of us knew yet, not me, not Elaine, not the board members sitting there pretending this was normal, was that a storm was coming. A real one. The kind that knocks out power lines across an entire county. And when that storm finally hit Oak Ridge Estates, that little generator everyone hated would suddenly become the most important machine in the neighborhood. If you want to hear how things got worse before they got better, and the night Elaine Whitmore ended up standing on my porch asking for help. The strange thing about neighborhood conflicts is how quickly they stop being private. At first it was just letters. Then it became whispers. Oak Ridge Estates wasn't a huge development, maybe 40 homes tucked into a quiet pocket outside Cedar Ridge County. The kind of place where people waved when they walked their dogs, and everyone knew whose kid played soccer on which weekend. But after the HOA hearing, people started looking at me differently. Not everyone, just enough to notice. One afternoon, I was mowing the lawn when my neighbor Greg wandered over from across the street. Greg's the kind of guy who always smells faintly like barbecue smoke and engine oil, retired mechanic, friendly, but not exactly the type to get involved in neighborhood politics. He leaned against the fence and nodded toward the side yard. That the famous generator? I shut off the mower. Apparently. He chuckled. My wife said the HOA meeting got spicy. That's one way to describe it. Greg rubbed his beard, thinking, "You gonna take it out?" "No." He nodded once, like he respected the answer. Figured. Then he lowered his voice a little. "You're not the only one who thinks Elaine's gone a little power crazy lately." Turns out the generator thing wasn't the first conflict. A few months earlier, she'd fined someone for leaving a boat trailer in their driveway. Another neighbor got written up because their garden shed was an unapproved shade of beige. Oak Ridge Estates had slowly turned into Elaine's personal kingdom. And like most kingdoms, people complained quietly, but rarely pushed back. Until now. Still, HOA rules have teeth. A week after the hearing, I got another envelope. $750. Plus a warning about additional enforcement actions. If you've never dealt with an HOA lien before, let me explain something real quick. They can legally put a claim on your property over unpaid fines. Meaning they can mess with your mortgage, your credit, even threaten foreclosure depending on the situation. Pretty wild power for a group of neighbors with matching polo shirts. But here's the thing about logistics officers. We document everything. Every letter from the HOA went into a folder. Every email got printed. Every time someone from the board stepped onto my property without permission, my security cameras logged it. I didn't argue anymore. Didn't attend another hearing. Didn't send angry emails. I just kept records. Meanwhile, life kept moving the way it always does. Lily had school, homework, doctor appointments, all the normal rhythms of raising a kid who pretends she's tougher than she actually is. One evening, we were sitting at the kitchen table coloring together when she asked a question that caught me off guard. "Dad." "Yeah, kiddo." "Are we in trouble?" I looked up. "What makes you ask that?" She shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "I heard Mrs. Whitmore talking outside the other day. She said our house was a problem. Kids hear more than adults realize." I leaned back in the chair and thought about how to explain neighborhood politics to a 12-year-old without making the world sound worse than it already is. "Sometimes grown-ups disagree about rules," I said. "Like school rules." "Kind of. Are we breaking them?" I paused. Then I smiled a little. "Nope. We're just reminding people why some rules shouldn't exist." She seemed satisfied with that answer and went back to coloring a very purple-looking horse. But inside, I was tired. Being in constant conflict drains you in ways that are hard to explain. Not the shouting kind of conflict, the slow, quiet kind where someone keeps poking at your life through paperwork and technicalities. Elaine kept escalating. First the fines, then violation notices taped to my front door. Then one morning I came outside and found small orange flags stuck in the grass along the edge of my yard. Survey markers. I called the HOA office. "What exactly are these for?" I asked. The woman on the phone sounded nervous. The board requested a compliance survey." "For what?" "To determine if your generator structure violates setback regulations. It's sitting on a concrete pad inside my property line." "I'm just relaying the board's request, Mr. Mercer." That afternoon, Elaine herself showed up again. Clipboard, sunglasses, that same calm expression like she was inspecting a grocery store aisle. I met her halfway down the driveway. "You planning to dig up the yard too?" I asked. "Just verifying measurements." "You're trespassing. Association bylaws grant inspection rights." I crossed my arms. "For a machine that keeps my kid breathing at night." She didn't react to that part. Not even a flicker. "You're being dramatic," she said. That sentence. I remember it very clearly. Because right then something shifted in my head. There are moments when you realize someone isn't misunderstanding you. They just don't care. You ever been through a blackout with medical equipment running on battery? I asked. "No." "Then maybe don't call it dramatic." Her jaw tightened slightly, but she kept that polished tone. "Rules apply to everyone." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "You're right. They do." For a second we just stood there. Then she turned and walked back toward the sidewalk again, leaving the survey flags sticking out of my lawn like little warning signs. That standoff became the unofficial start of a Cold War. Elaine kept pushing. I kept documenting. Neighbors watched from a distance, curious but cautious. Summer passed that way. Then fall. Then winter rolled in earlier than usual. Now, if you've never lived in the upper Midwest, you might not realize how quickly winter storms can turn ugly. One day it's just cold air and gray skies. The next day the Weather Channel is using phrases like historic system and infrastructure risk. The forecast started mentioning a major ice storm headed towards Cedar Ridge County. Power companies issued warnings. Emergency services told people to prepare for outages. The funny thing is, when you've spent years planning for worst-case scenarios, those warnings don't scare you. They just confirm your preparation was worth it. 2 days before the storm, I checked the generator, changed the oil, topped off the fuel, ran a quick test cycle. The machine hummed softly behind the fence like it always did. Reliable. Predictable. Meanwhile, the HOA sent me another letter. Total fines now, $1,100. Failure to comply could result in property lien proceedings. I set the letter on the kitchen counter and didn't even open my laptop to respond. Because outside, the sky had already started turning that strange heavy gray color that means weather is about to make its entrance. The storm hit overnight. Freezing rain first, then sleet, then wind. By morning the trees looked like glass sculptures bending under the weight of ice. Power lines snapped one by one across the county. At 7:42 a.m. our neighborhood transformer finally gave up. Everything went dark. Except my house. The generator kicked on automatically with that familiar low rumble. Inside, Lily's breathing machine never even paused. I poured coffee, watched the ice coating the backyard fence, and listened to the quiet hum of electricity doing exactly what it was designed to do. Across the street, Greg stepped out onto his porch wearing 3 layers and looking confused. He glanced at my house. Lights on. Heat running. Then he looked up at the dead power lines hanging across the road. I could practically see the gears turning in his head. Within an hour, the entire neighborhood was outside. No power. No heat. Phones dying. Kids shivering. And in the middle of all that darkness, one house still glowing. Mine. By mid-afternoon, the first knock came at the door. It was Greg. "Hey, Danny," he said, rubbing his hands together. "Any chance we could plug a phone charger in for a bit?" Of course. Then another neighbor came. Then another. Extension cords started running across my porch like spaghetti. People charging phones, warming up inside for a few minutes before heading back home. Community, real community, forming naturally in the middle of a crisis. And I was happy to help. But there was one person in Oak Ridge Estates who hadn't shown up yet. Elaine Whitmore. The same woman who fined me for the machine, now keeping half the block connected to the outside world. By nightfall, the temperature had dropped below freezing. The power company announced repairs could take several days. And right around 9 that evening, another knock came at the door. This one slower, more hesitant. When I opened it, Elaine Whitmore was standing on my porch. No clipboard, no sunglasses, just a heavy coat, wind in her hair, and the first hint of something I'd never seen on her face before. Uncertainty. If you want to hear what happened next, and why the entire HOA collapsed after that night. When I opened the door, the cold air came in first, sharp, quiet, the kind that makes the house feel warmer the moment you shut it out again. Elaine Whitmore stood there on my porch. No clipboard, no sunglasses, no perfect HOA president posture. Just a woman in a heavy winter coat, hair a little messy from the wind, holding a flashlight that was already starting to dim. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. Behind me, I could hear the low hum of the generator and the quiet buzz of voices in the living room, where 3 of my neighbors were charging phones and drinking the coffee Lily had insisted on helping make. Elaine glanced past my shoulder at the light inside, then back at me. Your power is still on. I nodded. Generator. Of course she knew that. That was the entire problem. Her lips pressed together slightly, and for a moment it looked like she might turn around and leave, pride still fighting with whatever brought her to my door. But the cold wind behind her won that argument. My heat went out hours ago, she said finally, and my phone is almost dead. Her voice wasn't weak exactly, but it was missing the edge it always carried. I leaned against the door frame and studied her. 6 months earlier, she'd stood in my yard telling me I was being dramatic about my daughter's medical equipment. Now the temperature outside was dropping fast. Power lines were down all over Cedar Ridge County, and the one thing she'd tried to remove from my property was the only reliable electricity source in the neighborhood. Life has a funny way of writing its own punchlines. You here to issue another fine? I asked. She exhaled slowly through her nose. This isn't the time for that. Seems like exactly the time. The wind rattled the porch railing. Inside the house, someone laughed at something Greg said, and the warm light spilled out around us. Elaine looked tired. Not the theatrical kind of tired people use to win arguments. Real tired. The kind that shows up when control disappears, and suddenly you're just another person dealing with the same storm as everyone else. I'm not here about the generator, she said. Good. My phone needs to charge. I let the silence sit there for a second. Not because I enjoyed the moment, though I'll admit there was a tiny part of me that did, but because something important had to happen right there on that porch. Not revenge. Accountability. I stepped aside and opened the door wider. You can come in. Her shoulders loosened just a little as she stepped past me into the warm living room. Greg looked up from the couch and raised his eyebrows like he'd just spotted a celebrity. Well, I'll be damned, he muttered. Elaine pretended not to hear him. She stood awkwardly near the entryway while I handed her an extension cord. Outlet's over there, I said. She plugged in her phone and wrapped her hands around the coffee mug Lily offered her without saying much. For a while the house just hummed with quiet activity. Phones charging, neighbors warming up, snow tapping softly against the windows. And in the background that steady, patient sound of the generator doing its job. About 20 minutes later, Elaine walked into the kitchen where I was checking the fuel level log I kept for the generator. You planned for this, she said. I shrugged. I planned for most things. That machine could power several houses. It's not designed for that. But it could. I didn't answer. She studied the notes in my little spiral notebook, fuel usage, run cycles, maintenance checks, the kind of boring logistics data that used to fill half my Army career. You've been preparing for outages for years, haven't you? Since Lily's diagnosis. She nodded slowly. Then she said something I didn't expect. I didn't believe you. I looked up. What? At the hearing, she said quietly. When you talked about your daughter's equipment, I thought you were exaggerating to avoid compliance. I stared at her for a second. So you fine me anyway. I enforce the rules. That's not the same thing. Another silence. Then she rubbed her forehead like she suddenly had a headache. You need to understand something, she said. This neighborhood fought hard to keep property values stable. The HOA rules protect that. From generators? From things getting messy. I gestured toward the living room where half the neighborhood was sitting together sharing blankets and charging phones. You know what actually protects a neighborhood? I said. She didn't answer. People helping each other when things get messy. She followed my gaze toward the living room. For the first time since she arrived, I saw her expression soften. Not much, just enough. The storm lasted 3 days. Power crews were stretched across the entire county dealing with ice damage and fallen lines. During those 3 days, my house basically turned into the unofficial Oak Ridge Estates Community Center. Extension cords everywhere. Neighbors rotating through in shifts to warm up, cook food, charge devices. At one point, Greg dragged over a small propane grill, and we made enough grilled cheese sandwiches to feed half the block. Even Lily got into the spirit, setting up a little drawing station for the younger kids. And Elaine kept coming back too. The first day, she mostly stayed quiet. Second day, she started helping organize things, who needed to charge what, whose elderly parents needed a warm place to sit. By the third day, something interesting had happened. The HOA president version of Elaine Whitmore had started to fade. In her place was just Elaine, a neighbor, someone carrying blankets instead of violation notices. Late that third evening, the power company trucks finally rolled down our street. Lights flickered back on one house at a time, like someone slowly waking the neighborhood up again. People cheered. Phones buzzed. Heaters kicked back to life. And just like that, the emergency phase ended. But the story didn't end there. Because about a week later, the HOA scheduled another meeting. This time the room was packed. Every chair filled. People standing along the walls. I sat near the back with Greg while the board members shuffled papers at the front table. Elaine looked different that night. No sharp tone. No performance. Just thoughtful. She cleared her throat and addressed the room. I want to begin by acknowledging a mistake. You could hear the air shift in the room. She continued. The enforcement actions taken against Daniel Mercer regarding his generator were short-sighted. Greg leaned over and whispered. Short-sighted might be the politest word she could have picked. Elaine went on. The fines will be rescinded immediately. A few people clapped. Then she added something no one expected. And I will be stepping down as HOA president effective tonight. The room erupted into murmurs. One of the other board members looked like someone had just unplugged his life support. Elaine raised a hand. I've realized something during the storm, she said. Rules meant to protect a community should never prevent that community from protecting itself. Then she glanced toward me in the back of the room. That generator, the one we tried to remove, helped half this neighborhood when the power went out. She paused. And we should be grateful for it. That was the moment Oak Ridge Estates changed. Not overnight, but slowly. The board rewrote several of the strict equipment rules. Emergency preparedness became part of the community guidelines. A few months later, the HOA itself dissolved when enough homeowners voted to replace it with a simple neighborhood association with almost no enforcement power. And that generator? It's still sitting right where I installed it. Behind the fence. Quiet. Legal. Ready. Every now and then during storm season, someone jokes that my backyard is basically the neighborhood power plant. I just smile and keep up with the maintenance schedule. Because the truth is, that machine was never about winning an argument. It was about keeping my daughter safe. Everything else that happened after that, well, that was just the storm clearing the air. Now I'm curious what you think. If you were in that situation, would you have helped Elaine when she knocked on the door? Or would you have told the HOA president to deal with the consequences of her own rules? Let me know down in the comments. And if you've ever dealt with a power-hungry HOA or a neighbor who pushed things too far, share your story too. Because sometimes the most interesting battles don't happen on a battlefield. They happen right across the street.